Do you remember those forgotten Southern dishes no one makes anymore? The ones that vanished from our tables without a sound? These dishes once filled Sunday spreads, church suppers, and family kitchens, carrying stories and comfort in every bite. What else have we quietly let slip away with them? Sally Lunn bread was once the pride of many Southern kitchens, a golden loaf that balanced richness with simplicity. Unlike the quick cornbreads and biscuits that defined everyday suppers, this bread required patience. It was made with yeast, giving it a lofty rise and tender crumb, but it also had a subtle sweetness that came from sugar and butter folded into the dough. Families often reserved Sally Lunn for Sundays, holidays, or company because it demanded time and attention that could not always be spared during the Depression or lean years. The bread was baked in heavy pans, often cast iron, which gave it a crisp crust that contrasted with its soft interior. Its popularity stretched from Virginia to Kentucky, where it appeared at breakfast, sliced and spread with butter or sorghum molasses, and at dinner, served beside roasted meats. Today, it has nearly disappeared from tables, overshadowed by easier breads that require less effort. Yet Sally Lunn bread remains a reminder of how Southern cooks elevated simple ingredients into something elegant, transforming flour, eggs, and yeast into a loaf that symbolized hospitality and care. Tomato aspic was once a staple at luncheons, garden clubs, and church suppers across the South, though it baffles many people today. Made with tomato juice, gelatin, and seasonings like onion or celery salt, it was poured into molds and chilled until firm. Often, it was served sliced or cubed alongside salads, meats, or even sandwiches. For many women hosting luncheons in the early to mid-20th century, tomato aspic signaled refinement and creativity. The bright red color gave plates a decorative touch, and the savory tang paired well with richer dishes. Some families enjoyed it with mayonnaise or cream cheese to soften the bite, while others garnished it with herbs. While the idea of tomato gelatin may sound unappealing today, back then it was viewed as sophisticated and practical, especially in hot climates where chilled dishes offered relief. Tomato aspic was not born of hardship, but of style, showing how Southern cooks followed national trends while adapting them with local ingredients. Its absence today marks a shift away from elaborate molded salads towards simpler fare. Ambrosia. Salad with fresh coconut was not the quick throw-together dish we see at modern potlucks, but a true labor of love. Families grated fresh coconut by hand, a time-consuming process that often required a special tool or sheer determination. Oranges were peeled and sectioned, sometimes layered with pineapple, sugar, and the freshly grated coconut in glass bowls that sparkled with color. This dish often appeared during the holidays, especially Christmas, when citrus fruits were abundant and coconuts became available in markets. Children looked forward to the sweetness, while adults valued its symbolism of abundance in lean times. Ambrosia meant more than fruit salad. It was a ritual that tied families together through both labor and enjoyment. Every bite reflected the season's generosity, even if resources were otherwise tight. Modern versions made with canned fruit and bagged coconut lack the painstaking care of the original. Forgotten by many, the old-fashioned version reminds us of a time when effort in the kitchen was an act of devotion and celebration. Its disappearance is not just about food, but about lost traditions of gathering and gratitude. Pine bark stew was a rustic fish stew that once warmed the bellies of Southern families living near rivers and coasts. Sometimes compared to Brunswick stew, pine bark stew used inexpensive fish like catfish or bream, simmered with potatoes, onions, and tomatoes until the broth grew hearty and thick. The name supposedly came from cooking the stew in large outdoor pots near piles of pine bark used for kindling. It was a communal dish, prepared in big batches for neighbors, hunters, or church gatherings where everyone contributed what they had. Cornbread or saltine crackers were served on the side to soak up the flavorful broth. For many working-class families, pine bark stew was survival food, stretching cheap fish and vegetables into something filling. Yet it carried a social meaning too, because it brought communities together in times of need and celebration. While hardly known outside of old fishing towns today, its memory lives on in stories told by grandparents. Its fading presence marks the loss of one more piece of Southern identity, rooted in resourcefulness and togetherness. Hoppin John with hog jowl was once a sacred New Year's tradition across the South, carrying both flavor and folklore. Made with black-eyed peas, rice, and smoky pork, it was believed to bring good luck and prosperity for the year ahead. Hog jowl, a fatty cut from the pig's cheek, was inexpensive and widely available, making it ideal for those with little money. Families simmered it with peas until the broth turned rich, then served it over rice for a dish that stretched to feed everyone at the table. Beyond sustenance, Hoppin John embodied hope, tying the start of the year to faith in better days. Children often joined in the ritual, even if they disliked the peas, because skipping the dish felt like tempting fate. Today, many Southerners skip the hog jowl altogether or abandon the dish entirely, replacing it with more modern meals. But the original carried a weight that went far beyond its ingredients. Forgotten now, Hoppin John with hog jowl tells a story about survival, culture, and the power of tradition to sustain the spirit. Sorghum molasses. Stack cake was more than a dessert. It was a centerpiece of Appalachian weddings and celebrations. Families in the mountains could not afford elaborate tiered cakes, so they created this dish by stacking thin layers of cake, often baked by different neighbors, with a filling made of sorghum molasses and stewed apples. The result was a dense, sweet cake that grew moister and more flavorful the longer it rested. Sorghum molasses, cheaper than sugar, added depth and a rustic sweetness unique to the region. Each layer symbolized the contribution of family and community, turning the cake into more than food. It was a collective expression of joy. Though once beloved, it faded as refined sugar and store-bought cakes became accessible, leaving stack cakes as a fading memory. Today, they survive mostly in regional cookbooks or heritage festivals, rarely baked in modern kitchens. Yet the sorghum molasses stack cake endures in memory as proof of how Southern cooks transformed scarcity into celebration. Its absence today is not just the loss of a recipe, but the fading of a cultural ritual of sharing and resilience. Corn pone was a dish tied directly to survival. A cornbread stripped of luxury and made with nothing but cornmeal, water, and salt. Unlike cornbread enriched with milk, eggs, or sugar, corn pone was dense, chewy, and often cooked in a skillet or even on hot stones near a fire. It was the food of farmers, laborers, and families with little more than a sack of cornmeal to last the week. Despite its simplicity, corn pone carried dignity because it kept people alive during lean years. It was eaten plain, with beans, or crumbled into milk or pot liquor for extra nourishment. Children grew up on it, and older generations remembered it as a symbol of persistence when choices were scarce. Though not glamorous, it filled stomachs and carried people through desperate times. As prosperity grew, corn pone was replaced by softer, sweeter breads, leaving it nearly forgotten. Yet its legacy remains in the memory of grandparents who knew its importance. Corn pone tells the story of survival through simplicity, a dish that gave strength when little else could. Coca-Cola salad was one of the quirkiest dishes to grace Southern church gatherings and potluck tables. Made with cherry gelatin, canned fruit, nuts, and a splash of Coca-Cola, it was sweet, fizzy, and colorful enough to make children smile. Housewives loved serving it because it looked fun and modern, especially when molded into rings or squares. In an era when gelatin salads were fashionable, adding Coca-Cola gave it a Southern twist, marrying tradition with novelty. It was usually served as a side dish, though its sweetness often pushed it into dessert territory. Families remembered it fondly as part of Sunday suppers or holiday spreads where creativity was more important than convention. While strange to modern eyes, Coca-Cola salad was a reminder of how cooks made do with what they had and added a bit of flair to everyday meals. Over time, its popularity fizzled out as tastes shifted and gelatin salads fell from grace. Today, it survives only in nostalgic recipe cards, a relic of mid-century Southern kitchens. Shoofly pie, while often linked with Pennsylvania Dutch, had a strong foothold in Southern farm kitchens too. This pie was built on molasses, a cheap sweetener that gave it a dark, rich flavor unmatched by sugar. Crumb topping made from flour, butter, and sugar was sprinkled over the filling, creating a pie that was both sticky and tender. For farming families, it was an easy way to transform pantry staples into something indulgent. Shoofly pie often appeared on breakfast tables as well as at supper, offering sweetness at any time of day. The name supposedly came from the need to shoo flies away from the sticky molasses, a detail children found amusing. Though once common, the pie slowly disappeared as molasses faded from southern kitchens, replaced by refined sugar and more modern desserts. Shoofly pie endures in folklore but rarely in reality, leaving only a memory of its humble, sweet character. Forgotten now, it represents the deep ties between food, resourcefulness, and the land that made it possible. Sweet potato pone was once a staple southern dessert, made from grated sweet potatoes mixed with butter, milk, and spices, then baked until golden. Unlike pie, it was dense and pudding-like, often cooked in simple pans without crusts. Families prized it for its versatility. It could be sweetened with molasses for richness or left plainer for a more filling dish. Sweet potato pone appeared at holidays, Sunday suppers, and family reunions, tying communities together through familiar flavor. Children loved its sweetness, while adults appreciated its ability to stretch limited ingredients into something comforting. Unlike many desserts, it required no fancy tools or ingredients, relying instead on what farmers grew in abundance. Its disappearance from modern tables is due in part to convenience foods and changing tastes, but older Southerners still speak of it with affection. Sweet potato pone was not just food, it was comfort, memory, and tradition baked into every bite. Forgotten today, it remains a quiet symbol of Southern resilience and the power of simple cooking. Redeye gravy was once a breakfast essential in many Southern homes, though it has nearly disappeared outside of small diners that still cling to tradition. This thin, salty gravy was made by frying country ham in a skillet and then deglazing the pan with strong black coffee. The mixture created a reddish-brown sauce with a sharp, savory flavor that was poured over grits, biscuits, or the ham itself. For farm families, it was both practical and resourceful, using nothing more than drippings and leftover coffee to stretch a meal. The bold taste was an acquired one, but it became a source of comfort for people who grew up with it. Redeye gravy also carried cultural weight, as it symbolized a South that prized thrift and creativity in the kitchen. Many older Southerners still recall mornings when the smell of ham frying meant this gravy was on the way. Today, it is rare to find it outside of small-town diners or family kitchens, and its disappearance tells a story of changing tastes. Redeye gravy remains a dish of memory rather than regular practice. Poke salad greens were a classic example of Depression-era foraging turned into food tradition, though they required care and skill. Pokeweed grows wild across the South, and its young leaves were harvested, boiled, and drained several times to remove natural toxins. Once prepared safely, the greens were fried with bacon fat or mixed into stews, providing a much-needed source of vitamins. For poor rural families, poke salad represented survival, turning something free and wild into a filling side dish. It was not glamorous, but it carried the pride of resourcefulness in desperate times. Poke salad suppers even became community events in some areas, celebrating a food that was both humble and dangerous if mishandled. Children grew up knowing that only the young leaves were safe to eat, while older parts of the plant were poisonous. Today, few people bother with the time or risk, leaving poke salad largely forgotten except in folklore. It remains a powerful reminder of how closely people once lived with the land. Chicken bog was a dish deeply rooted in South Carolina, where rice fields shaped both cuisine and culture. It was a hearty one-pot meal made by cooking chicken, rice, and smoked sausage together until the broth thickened into something almost stew-like. Families loved it because it stretched a single chicken to feed many mouths, with the rice absorbing all the rich flavors. In small towns, chicken bog was often served at gatherings, festivals, and family reunions, feeding crowds from big pots stirred outdoors. Children loved the soft texture, while adults appreciated its comfort and reliability. The name itself carried mystery, with many saying it came from the way the rice bogged down in the broth. Though once common, chicken bog has faded as fast food and boxed meals replaced slow-cooking traditions. In its time, it was a dish of resilience, thrift, and togetherness. Forgotten now in many places, it survives only in pockets of South Carolina where families still pass the recipe down. Hogshead cheese was a dish that made full use of an animal, born from nose-to-tail traditions where nothing could be wasted. Despite its name, it contained no cheese at all, but was instead a cold cut made by boiling the head of a pig with spices, onions, and vinegar until the meat and gelatin formed a solid loaf. Once chilled, it was sliced and served cold, often with crackers or bread. For rural Southerners, hogshead cheese was practical, economical, and surprisingly flavorful. It reflected a time when families valued every scrap and could not afford to throw anything away. Children might have balked at the idea, but many adults treasured its rich taste. Hogshead cheese was also sold in local butcher shops and became a staple of working-class lunches. Today, it is rare to find outside specialty stores or heritage festivals, its strong flavor and rustic origins falling out of favor. Still, it tells the story of thrift, resilience, and respect for every part of the hog. Blackberry dumplings were once a highlight of southern summers, made when berries ripened along hedgerows and farm fields. Families would gather buckets of wild blackberries, then stew them with sugar until they formed a sweet, fragrant sauce. Into this bubbling mixture, cooks dropped spoonfuls of simple dough that puffed into soft dumplings as they simmered. The result was a dessert that was both filling and joyful, capturing the taste of summer in every bite. Children loved helping pick berries, often sneaking handfuls as they worked, while adults valued the chance to turn free fruit into a crowd pleaser. Blackberry dumplings were often served with milk or cream if available, making them even more indulgent. They were the kind of dish that brought neighbors together, with everyone pitching in during harvest. Today, they have nearly vanished, replaced by store-bought pies and packaged desserts. Their disappearance is a loss of flavor and tradition, because blackberry dumplings carried with them the sweetness of both the land and the season. Corn dodgers were a humble food that carried workers through long days in the fields or on the road. Made from cornmeal, salt, and water, sometimes enriched with lard, the dough was shaped into small cakes and fried or baked. They were sturdy, portable, and filling, making them perfect for laborers who needed food that could travel. Families packed them into lunch pails, and soldiers carried them during the Civil War, keeping the tradition alive for generations. Corn dodgers were often eaten plain, but sometimes dipped in molasses or gravy if available. They symbolized a kind of practical cooking where function mattered more than luxury. Though simple, they were tied to the rhythms of work, hunger, and endurance. Today, corn dodgers are rarely seen outside of history books or reenactments, forgotten in favor of softer breads and convenience foods. Yet their story reminds us how much people relied on ingenuity to make basic grains stretch. Corn dodgers were never glamorous, but they were dependable. Okra and tomatoes with rice was a classic side dish that thrived in southern kitchens, blending garden staples into a filling, flavorful plate. Fresh okra was sliced and stewed with tomatoes, onions, and sometimes bacon fat, then spooned generously over rice. It was inexpensive and wholesome, relying on vegetables that were easy to grow in the southern climate. For families, it was a dependable dish that appeared at weeknight dinners, Sunday suppers, and potlucks alike. The combination of tangy tomatoes and tender okra gave it a unique texture and taste that many children learned to love, even if reluctantly at first. Rice made it hearty enough to stand alone when meat was scarce, adding value to a humble dish. Though once celebrated, it has slowly faded as processed foods and fast meals replaced traditional garden cooking. Today, it is remembered mainly in rural kitchens or cookbooks. Okra and tomatoes with rice remains a snapshot of how southern cooks turned simple harvests into comfort. Souse meat was a dish that reflected both thrift and creativity, a cousin to hogshead cheese with its own distinct preparation. It was made from pork scraps, often feet or ears, boiled until tender and then pickled in vinegar with spices. Once cooled and pressed into a loaf, it was sliced and eaten cold with crackers or bread. Families valued it because it used parts of the animal that would otherwise go to waste, stretching limited resources into multiple meals. The tangy, pickled flavor gave it a sharpness that stood out from other pork dishes, making it memorable even if not beloved by everyone. Souse meat was a common sight at butchers and small groceries, sold cheaply to working families. Children often avoided it, but older generations considered it a practical staple. Today, souse meat has nearly vanished, its strong taste and rustic image less appealing to modern palates. Still, it remains a marker of a time when nothing edible was ever discarded. Chess pie with vinegar was one of the South's thriftiest desserts, proving that even the poorest households could enjoy something sweet. Made from sugar, eggs, butter, and a splash of vinegar, it baked into a custard-like pie with a tangy edge. The vinegar cut the sweetness, balancing the richness of the filling and making it unique. Families loved chess pie because the ingredients were always on hand, no matter how tight the budget. It was served at Sunday dinners, holidays, and gatherings, offering comfort and familiarity. While fancier pies required fruit or nuts, chess pie was humble and practical, making it beloved across generations. Children often remembered it as the dessert of their childhood, while adults prized it for its simplicity. Today, it is less common outside of heritage cookbooks, replaced by more modern sweets. Chess pie with vinegar stands as a symbol of Depression-era resilience, turning pantry basics into something remarkable. Forgotten now, it remains a dish worth remembering for both its flavor and history. Pineapple. Upside-down cake in cast iron was once the ultimate Southern hostess dessert, a showpiece that combined practicality with flair. It was made by layering canned pineapple rings, cherries, and brown sugar in the bottom of a cast iron skillet, then pouring cake batter on top. After baking, the cake was flipped out to reveal a golden caramelized topping that dazzled guests. This dish thrived in the mid-20th century, when canned fruit became widely available and affordable. It quickly became a centerpiece at church suppers, potlucks, and holiday gatherings. Children were enchanted by its bright colors, while adults admired its sweet, buttery flavor. The cast iron skillet made it accessible since nearly every household had one, and it ensured even cooking and a crisp edge. Though it once symbolized Southern hospitality and creativity, it has mostly disappeared from modern tables, overshadowed by convenience desserts. Today, it survives only in nostalgic memory, reminding us of a time when a single cake could capture the joy of a community. Fried catfish roe was once a prized seasonal delicacy in Southern fishing communities, celebrated for its crisp texture and savory flavor. When fishermen brought in catfish, nothing was wasted, and the roe was dredged in cornmeal and fried until golden. It was often served alongside hush puppies or simple greens, making a meal that felt indulgent despite its humble origins. Families valued it as a rare treat tied to the rhythms of the river, where seasonal catches dictated what appeared on the table. Children grew up with memories of this dish as a reward for long days spent fishing with parents or grandparents. It reflected a time when local waters directly fed households and traditions. Today, fried catfish roe has nearly disappeared, pushed aside by changing tastes and concerns about sourcing. Few restaurants still serve it, and many younger Southerners have never tasted it. Its loss marks a fading link between people and the waterways that once sustained them, leaving it more a memory than a menu item. Hominy stew, inspired by native and African influences, was a hearty dish that showcased the South's diverse food routes. Made by simmering hominy corn with pork bones, onions, and peppers, it created a filling stew with smoky depth. It resembled posole from native traditions, adapted by African-American cooks into regional variations. For rural households, it was an economical way to use cheap cuts and corn, stretching ingredients into something both nourishing and flavorful. Families gathered around bowls of it during cold nights, finding comfort in its simplicity. The dish also carried cultural history, reflecting centuries of blending traditions in Southern kitchens. Each spoonful connected communities across time, reminding people of resilience and shared heritage. Though once widespread, hominy stew has largely vanished from modern tables, overshadowed by canned soups and quicker meals. It remains a dish remembered in pockets of the South, where cooks keep old recipes alive. Its story is one of survival, adaptation, and flavor born from necessity. Benne seed cookies were small, nutty treats rooted in Gullah culture, treasured for both flavor and symbolism. Made with benne seeds, a type of sesame brought from Africa, these cookies were crisp, lightly sweet, and full of heritage. They were often baked for holidays, celebrations, or as gifts, carrying meaning beyond the plate. For generations, families passed down recipes, with each batch representing resilience and tradition. Children eagerly waited for them at special gatherings, their delicate crunch setting them apart from ordinary sweets. Unlike store-bought cookies, benne seed cookies carried the weight of ancestry, a taste tied to identity. They showcased how African ingredients shaped Southern foodways in lasting ways. Today, they are rarely made outside of dedicated cultural circles or festivals, overshadowed by more mainstream desserts. Their absence reflects not just a shift in taste, but a loss of connection to history. Forgotten by many, benne seed cookies remain a culinary treasure worth remembering for their story as much as their flavor. Scuppernong grape jelly was a staple of homesteads across the South, made from wild, bronze-colored grapes native to the region. Families harvested scuppernongs in late summer, cooking them down with sugar to create a sweet, musky jelly. It was spread thick on biscuits, cornbread, or fresh loaves, bringing the taste of the season into the pantry. Children often helped pick the grapes, staining their hands and lips as they filled baskets. For many, it was less about the jelly itself and more about the ritual of gathering and preserving together. This homemade preserve tied households to the land, with each jar holding the essence of place and memory. Scuppernong jelly was also shared among neighbors, reflecting community bonds built around food. Today, it has become rare, replaced by store-bought jams and the fading of foraging traditions. Its decline marks a quiet loss of self-sufficiency and regional pride. Forgotten on most tables, it remains a sweet symbol of Southern ingenuity and heritage. Field pea salad was a thrifty dish that made the most of seasonal legumes, mixing fresh field peas with peppers, onions, and vinegar. Served chilled, it was a refreshing side for hot Southern summers, often brought to church picnics or family reunions. The tang of vinegar balanced the earthiness of the peas, making it both simple and satisfying. Families appreciated it as a cheap, garden-based dish that stretched across gatherings. Children often picked peas from pods, their small hands helping prepare what would later fill large bowls. Field pea salad was more than just food, it represented the connection between gardens and tables, showing how nothing went to waste. Its bright flavors stood out among heavier Southern fare, giving balance to meals. Today, it has slipped from popularity, replaced by mayonnaise-heavy salads and modern sides. Forgotten in many kitchens, its memory lingers in old recipe boxes. Field pea salad was proof that even the humblest ingredients could shine when handled with care. Cracklin cornbread was once the pride of farmhouse kitchens, combining the richness of pork with the staple of cornmeal. Cracklings, or crispy bits of pork skin and fat, were folded into cornbread batter before baking. The result was a savory, hearty bread with bursts of crunch and flavor in every bite. For families, it was a way to stretch pork trimmings and ensure nothing went to waste. Served hot from cast-iron pans, it paired perfectly with beans, greens, or stews, rounding out meals with rustic comfort. Children grew up associating its smell with warmth and family dinners. Cracklin cornbread carried cultural weight, embodying thrift and creativity in rural kitchens. Today, plain cornbread dominates, leaving the Cracklin version nearly forgotten except in certain regions. Its decline reflects broader changes in diets and preferences, as pork fat gave way to lighter cooking. Still, it remains a powerful reminder of how Southern cooks celebrated resourcefulness. Cracklin cornbread was never just bread, it was heritage in every crumb. Sorrel drink was a festive tart beverage once served in Southern homes, carrying deep Caribbean influence. Made from dried hibiscus flowers steeped with spices, sugar, and citrus, It was a bright red drink with bold flavor. Families often prepared it for holidays or special gatherings where its tangy taste stood out from other sweet beverages. Sorrel was cherished not only for its refreshing qualities, but also for its ties to heritage and celebration. It reflected the blending of Caribbean and Southern traditions, especially within African American communities. Children enjoyed it chilled on hot days, while adults valued its cultural symbolism and unique taste. For many households, Sorrel drink marked special occasions with color and joy. Over time, it faded as sodas and commercial juices became common, overshadowing its handmade appeal. Today, it is mostly remembered in cultural festivals or passed down through family recipes. Sorrel drink remains a symbol of identity and resilience, showing how global traditions shaped Southern kitchens. Batter-fried eggplant rounds were a Depression-era side dish that turned vegetables into something hearty and satisfying. Sliced eggplant was dipped in batter or cornmeal and fried until crisp, creating a dish that could stand in for meat when money was scarce. Families loved its rich texture and flavor, which made simple suppers feel fuller. It became a thrifty way to transform garden harvests into something indulgent. For children, it offered a crunchy treat that made vegetables exciting, while adults appreciated its practicality. The dish reflected how Southern cooks elevated humble crops into meals that carried dignity and satisfaction. It was often served with simple sauces or alongside beans and bread, filling out a plate with ease. Today, fried eggplant has mostly disappeared from everyday kitchens, replaced by quicker or processed sides. Its fading popularity speaks to the loss of seasonal cooking tied directly to gardens. Batter-fried eggplant rounds remain a reminder of resilience and creativity born out of hard times. Cane syrup pie was a dessert deeply rooted in Southern sugar heritage, reflecting both thrift and sweetness. Made by blending cane syrup with eggs, butter, and a simple crust, it created a pie that was rich yet affordable. For families, it was an accessible treat when refined sugar was too costly or scarce. The deep, molasses-like flavor of cane syrup gave it a distinct taste that stood apart from other pies. Children eagerly anticipated slices at Sunday dinners or holidays, associating it with comfort and celebration. Adults valued it for how it stretched inexpensive pantry staples into something that felt indulgent. Cane syrup pie also carried cultural weight, tying households to the sugarcane fields that defined much of the Southern economy. Today, it is rarely baked, its bold flavor and simplicity overshadowed by modern desserts. Forgotten in most kitchens, it remains a reminder of Southern resilience. Cane syrup pie was more than a sweet ending. It was a testament to resourcefulness. Boiled custard was once a cherished stovetop dessert drink, especially popular at Christmas before eggnog dominated. Made by gently cooking milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla until thickened, it was served chilled in cups or poured over cakes. Families saw it as a holiday luxury, simple yet elegant. Children loved its creamy sweetness, often sneaking extra sips when no one was watching. Adults valued it as a celebratory tradition that required care and patience to prepare. Boiled custard represented comfort and indulgence in an era when ingredients were scarce, showing how much joy could come from basics. At gatherings, it was poured into punch bowls or shared from pitchers, bringing people together. Its place at Christmas tables gave it special meaning, tied to memory and festivity. Today, it is nearly forgotten, with eggnog taking over as the seasonal favorite. Its decline speaks to changing tastes and the fading of handmade holiday traditions. Boiled custard remains a forgotten gem, one sip carrying the warmth of Southern celebrations. Sour corn relish soup brought a bright tang to cold mountain evenings, drawing on a tradition of careful preservation that kept families fed through harsh winters. Corn kernels were fermented in brine until pleasantly sour, then combined with onions, smoked pork, and rich broth to create a soup that warmed the body and awakened the palate. Grandmothers managed the fermentation in stone crocks, watching the bubbling jars with practiced eyes to ensure the balance of salt and thyme. When ladled into bowls, the soup carried layers of flavor both fresh and aged, a testament to patience and planning. Children might wrinkle their noses at the sharp scent, but soon learned to love the lively taste that cut through heavy winter meals. This dish connected households to the rhythms of the seasons and the art of preserving food long before refrigeration was common. Sour corn relish soup endures as a memory of mountain kitchens where nothing was wasted, and every spoonful told of foresight and the wisdom of slow preparation. Cornmeal mush was a dish born out of need but remembered for its quiet comfort. Grandma would cook cornmeal slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a soft porridge, then pour it into a pan to chill overnight. By morning, it would be firm enough to slice, and she would fry it in a hot skillet until the edges turned crisp and golden. It was eaten with butter, syrup, or even a fried egg on top, whatever the pantry allowed. This was not flashy food, it was sustenance, plain and simple. But it filled bellies, warmed cold mornings, and never cost more than a few cents to make. Some people grew up thinking of it as Southern fare, others knew it as polenta, but in Grandma's kitchen it was just cornmeal mush. It showed up at breakfast more often than not, especially during lean months. These days, it is almost never mentioned outside of old cookbooks or Appalachian food blogs. But it deserves a second look. Few dishes stretch so far, last so long, or feel quite so honest on a plate. Sweet and sour red cabbage was the tangy side dish that anchored family dinners, potlucks, and Sunday suppers for decades. You would slice red cabbage, simmer it with vinegar, sugar, and maybe bacon or apples for extra richness, and let it cook down until tender and glossy. The result was sweet and sour braised cabbage with a deep color and a bright, tangy bite that balanced heavier meals like roast pork or fried sausage. It came from old-world cooking traditions brought by European immigrants and slipped into American cookbooks by the 1940s. Folks leaned on cabbage to stretch meals when times were tight, but they still wanted hearty, flavorful sides. Sweet and sour red cabbage earned its place at the table by turning basic ingredients into something special. You hardly see it today unless you are flipping through vintage cookbooks or dining in old-school German restaurants, but back then it was a dependable side that made plain meals feel brighter. Fried potatoes and onion skillet was a fast, hearty stovetop meal that showed up in countless kitchens when times were tough and bellies needed filling without much fuss or money. You would slice up potatoes, chop some onions, heat a little oil or butter in the skillet, and fry everything until golden and crispy. That was it. It sounds simple now, but back when groceries were scarce and time was short, this was a meal that worked. The potatoes filled everyone up, the onions added flavor, and the skillet turned humble pantry staples into something hot, hearty, and satisfying. Some folks added eggs, bacon, or herbs if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. You would find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, tucked into Grandma's cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations of families who knew how to stretch every last ingredient. Fried potatoes and onions might seem forgotten today, but back then, it was a reliable fix for hungry families trying to make groceries last, keep dinner on the table, and survive the lean weeks when every meal counted just a little more. Sweet shrub berry cake celebrated the fleeting fragrance of the sweet shrub bush, whose tiny blossoms filled warm Piedmont air with a heady perfume. Grandmothers steeped the petals in warm water to create a delicate syrup, then folded it into a buttery pound cake batter that baked into a tender, aromatic loaf. The floral essence gave the cake a subtle complexity, unlike any fruit or spice, a flavor that lingered softly on the tongue. Served plain or with a dusting of powdered sugar, it carried the memory of spring gardens into every slice. Because sweet shrub blossoms lasted only a short time, the cake became a yearly tradition, made quickly before the petals faded. Children helped gather the blossoms, learning the importance of timing and respect for nature's short gifts. Neighbors who tasted the cake often asked for the recipe, only to discover it relied on the very plant growing quietly along old fences. Sweet shrub berry cake remains a testament to the creativity of Southern grandmothers who found rare beauty in their own backyards. Hot fruit compote was the kind of side dish that brought comfort in the coldest months of the year. Grandma would bake a mix of canned or fresh fruits, apples, pears, peaches, cherries, together with a little cinnamon, sugar, and maybe a splash of orange juice or brandy. Served warm, it was sweet but not sugary, soft but never mushy. It sat beside baked ham, roast beef, or pork tenderloin, and offered a gentle sweetness to balance all the salt and spice. Compote made use of whatever fruit was around, even the bruised or overripe pieces. It was practical and indulgent at the same time. Some versions added raisins or nuts, others leaned on citrus zest for brightness. Either way, it made the kitchen smell like something special was happening. Today, most people do not think to warm fruit as a side dish, but once, it was a small gesture of love, something to round out a meal and make it feel whole. You can almost still taste it if you close your eyes. Potato puff bake was one of those thrifty, comforting sides that turned plain old mashed potatoes into something brand new with hardly any extra effort. Families back then knew how to stretch leftovers, and this recipe proved it. You would take yesterday's mashed potatoes, mix in an egg or two, maybe a little butter or milk, and bake them in small mounds until they puffed up golden brown on the outside but stayed soft and fluffy in the center. Potato puff bake found its way into all those old spiral-bound cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because it was cheap, filling, and practical. Back in the day, wasting food was not an option, and turning leftovers into something that felt special at dinner was just smart kitchen work. You would serve them next to roast meats, pork chops, or with a little gravy when not much else was on hand. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it made a plain meal stretch farther. You hardly see them now, but back then, potato puffs were a dependable trick that kept families fed and made every meal feel just a little more complete. Tomato and sugar. Open-faced sandwiches were one of those quirky summer snacks that showed up when gardens were full, money was tight, and lunch had to be quick and simple. You sliced a fresh tomato, buttered a piece of bread, sprinkled sugar over the top, and that was it. A little sweet, a little juicy, and ready in minutes. It sounds strange today, but back then, this was a familiar plate across farm towns and small kitchens all over America. The tomatoes were easy to grow, the bread stretched what you had, and the sugar turned it into a treat that brightened up long summer days. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists were short, and mealtime had to be stretched with what was already growing out back. You would find this simple snack scribbled in old cookbooks, passed around at neighborhood picnics, or taught to kids as one of their first kitchen lessons. It might seem forgotten now, but for plenty of folks back then, tomato and sugar sandwiches were a fast, filling reminder of how far a little garden and a little creativity could go. Ashcake. Corn dumplings carried the old-world method of hearth cooking into the modern memories of southern kitchens. Grandmothers mixed coarse cornmeal with a little salt and water to create a stiff dough, shaping small dumplings with practiced hands. Instead of boiling or baking, they nestled the dumplings directly into warm fireplace embers, covering them lightly with hot ash to trap the heat. As the dumplings cooked, the outer layer formed a delicate crust, while the inside steamed to tender perfection, capturing the faint smokiness of the hearth. Once brushed clean and split open, they were served with butter, sorghum syrup, or savory gravies depending on the meal. Children watched with fascination as the ashes were swept aside to reveal golden treasures ready to eat. This method required no pot or oven, making it essential when resources were scarce or when pioneers traveled far from settled towns. Ashcake corn dumplings remain a living memory of how Southern grandmothers transformed fire, grain, and patience into nourishing food that connected family to tradition and survival. Scalloped corn casserole was one of those cozy, golden-topped dishes that never needed a main course to shine. It started with sweet corn, fresh, canned, or creamed, mixed with milk, eggs, a bit of sugar, and crushed saltine crackers or breadcrumbs. Then it was baked until it set into a soft, custard-like center with a crispy, buttery top. This dish showed up at potlucks, funerals, holiday dinners, anywhere people came together and needed something warm and familiar. You did not need a lot of money to make it, just pantry staples and a steady oven. The smell alone was enough to call everyone to the table. Some versions had chopped peppers or bits of onion, others stayed simple and sweet. But no matter how you made it, it had the same purpose: comfort. Scalloped corn casserole made vegetables feel indulgent, like something you could take pride in bringing to a neighbor's house. It was the kind of dish that lived in handwritten notes and passed down recipes, not cookbooks with glossy photos. And somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside for flashier sides. But for those who remember, it will always be the taste of home. Mock oyster casserole, also known as eggplant dressing, was one of those clever Depression-era recipes that made its way into old cookbooks and never fully disappeared. The name might raise a few eyebrows now, but the whole point was to create a rich, flavorful casserole that mimicked the texture and heartiness of oyster stuffing without needing expensive seafood. You would take cooked eggplant, breadcrumbs, onions, and herbs, bake it until golden on top, and serve it as a side dish at holiday dinners or Sunday suppers. It filled out the table, stretched garden produce, and made even the simplest meal feel just a little more complete. Back then, you could find recipes like this scribbled in the margins of faded cookbooks or passed along at church potlucks. People knew how to make do with what they had, and this casserole proved that even eggplant could stand in for something fancier. You might not find it on modern menus, but back then, eggplant dressing was a practical, comforting side that made every meal feel just a little more special. Cold canned salmon salad was one of those quick, thrifty meals that turned an inexpensive pantry staple into a fast, protein-packed plate when groceries were running low. You flaked canned salmon into a bowl, stirred in mayonnaise, and chopped celery if you had it, and served it up cold. That was all there was to it. Fast, simple, and surprisingly satisfying when families needed something filling in a hurry. It might not sound exciting now, but back then, this recipe showed up in lunchboxes, on picnic tables, or tucked onto a dinner plate when meat was scarce and time was tight. The salmon added protein, the mayo brought it all together, and the celery gave it crunch if you were lucky enough to have some in the fridge. Families leaned on meals like this to stretch their groceries and keep everyone full without much effort. You would find cold canned salmon salad scribbled onto old recipe cards, passed down by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of forgotten quick meals. It might be overlooked now, but back then this was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight. Persimmon molasses pudding brought the deep sweetness of late autumn to southern tables with a dessert that tasted like the changing seasons themselves. Wild persimmons, gathered only after the first frost softened their tartness, were mashed into a smooth pulp and mixed with dark homemade molasses, fresh eggs, and a sprinkle of warm spices. The batter baked slowly until the center set into a dense, moist pudding that filled the house with a comforting aroma of caramel and spice. Grandmothers served generous slices warm, often with a splash of cream or a dollop of soft whipped topping. The rich flavor captured the essence of the wild fruit and the careful timing required to harvest it at peak ripeness. Families looked forward to this pudding each year, knowing it marked the final sweet offering before winter settled in. Persimmon molasses. Pudding remains a cherished memory of southern kitchens where the bounty of the woods met the patient art of home baking and the love of gathering family for the season's last harvest feast. Creamed celery was the quiet guest at the table. Never the centerpiece, but always welcome beside a roast or baked chicken. Celery might not sound exciting today, but back then it was a dependable staple, easy to grow and even easier to find at the corner grocer. Grandma would simmer sliced celery until just tender, then bathe it in a velvety white sauce made from milk, butter, and a dusting of flour. Sometimes she would add a splash of broth or a sprinkle of nutmeg to make it more elegant. It was soft, mild, and deeply nostalgic, food that asked nothing of you except to slow down and enjoy it. You would find creamed celery at Sunday suppers, Easter dinners, and any meal where someone wanted to show they cared. It was not flashy, but that was never the point. It reminded people of gentler times, of manners and matching dishes and sitting down to eat as a family. These days, celery is more likely to end up in juice or chopped raw into a salad. 3 bean-molded salad was one of those curious creations from vintage cookbooks that made vegetables and gelatin collide in the strangest way. You would take the classic 3-bean salad, green beans, wax beans, kidney beans, and suspend the whole thing in lemon or lime-flavored gelatin, set it in a mold, and proudly serve it at potlucks or family dinners. Back in the 1950s and 60s, molded salads were a rite of passage in every community cookbook, and this one was no different. It looked fancy, stretched pantry staples, and made sure not a single bean went to waste. People loved it for the bright colors, wobbly texture, and how it sat proudly next to roast meats or casseroles. It might sound a little off-putting now, but back then, molded salads were considered practical and even impressive. This one in particular packed protein, vegetables, and a little retro flair all in one strange, shimmering dish. You might not see it outside of vintage recipe cards today, but once upon a time, it was the talk of every potluck. Hot milk cake. Slices with butter were a quick, sweet fix that turned leftover dessert into a satisfying breakfast or afternoon snack with hardly any effort. You sliced up leftover hot milk cake, toasted it gently or warmed it up, and slathered it with butter. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had a rich, soft, slightly sweet bite that kept everyone happy when groceries were tight and meals had to stretch. It sounds simple, but back then, this little treat was a kitchen staple, especially in homes that believed nothing should go to waste. The hot milk cake gave it sweetness, the butter added richness, and together they turned leftovers into something new and satisfying. You would find this recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down through generations, or quietly shared between neighbors looking for ways to make every crumb count. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, hot milk cake slices with butter were a warm, comforting reminder that even the smallest leftovers could be turned into something worth savoring. Poke salad. Patty cakes brought the untamed flavor of wild greens into a dish that required skill and patience to make safe and delicious. Southern grandmothers knew to boil pokeweed leaves twice, draining the water carefully each time to remove natural toxins before mixing the greens with cornmeal, onion, and a touch of bacon fat. Shaped into small patties and fried until golden, the cakes offered a smoky, earthy bite that paired perfectly with a splash of homemade pepper vinegar. Families looked forward to early spring when pokeweed pushed through the soil, signaling fresh food after the lean winter months. Children learned from their elders how to recognize the plant and respect its potency, creating a bond between generations. These patties were both a meal and a lesson in caution and tradition. Poke salad patty cakes stand as a reminder of a time when knowledge of the land and careful preparation turned wild foraged leaves into a delicacy that tasted like the arrival of warmer days. Tomato aspic salad was one of those strange creations that could only have come from a time when gelatin ruled the kitchen. It was a savory molded dish, tomato juice thickened with unflavored gelatin, then loaded with chopped celery, olives, or green peppers, depending on what Grandma had on hand. The result? A firm, wobbly side dish served cold, usually cut into slices or cubes and placed proudly next to roast beef or deviled eggs. People either adored it or found it baffling, but no one forgot it. Tomato aspic was especially popular at luncheons, bridge clubs, and church picnics, where presentation mattered just as much as taste. It looked refined, in a retro sort of way, and was always served with a smile. The tangy, lightly spicy flavor made it oddly refreshing in the summertime, even if no one asked for seconds. Some recipes even added a dab of mayonnaise on top to finish the look. Today, tomato aspic is more often the butt of jokes than a dish on the menu. But for those who grew up with it, it brings back memories of glass dishes, ruffled tablecloths, and a different kind of dining pride. Sassafras root. Tea biscuits filled southern kitchens with a delicate scent that drifted through the house long before the biscuits reached the table. Grandmothers steeped freshly dug sassafras roots in simmering water until the liquid turned a warm amber and carried the gentle aroma of the forest. This fragrant tea replaced plain milk in a simple biscuit dough of flour, lard, and baking powder, adding a whisper of spice that set the biscuits apart from everyday bread. Rolled and cut into soft rounds, they baked to a golden finish that released a subtle, woodsy perfume when broken open. Served with honey or fresh churned butter, these biscuits became a treasured breakfast or late-night snack during cool seasons when the roots were easiest to find. Children learned to recognize the unique flavor as a sign of home, and the careful preparation turned an ordinary morning into a quiet celebration of the land. Sassafras root tea biscuits remain a reminder of how foraging and family tradition came together to create flavors no store could ever match. Rice ring with creamed vegetables was the side you pulled out to impress, even if all you had was rice, peas, and a few carrots. This molded rice dish showed up at luncheons, community suppers, and potlucks from the 1930s to the 60s, proving how fancy rice could look with the right presentation. You cooked seasoned rice, packed it into a bundt or gelatin mold, and once it's set, filled the center with creamy peas, carrots, and maybe mushrooms or green beans if you had them. It was affordable, filling, and looked fancier than it really was. These molded sides were all the rage, straight from vintage cookbooks with curled edges and faded ink. Rice ring with creamed vegetables was a no-nonsense way to stretch pantry staples while making the table look proper. You hardly see it outside old recipe cards now, but back then, it was a thrifty, creative dish that added kitchen pride to any meal. Pimento cheese on saltines was a southern staple that turned a few pantry ingredients into a quick, satisfying snack when groceries were running thin. You mixed up pimento cheese, usually some shredded cheddar, mayonnaise, chopped pimentos, and spread it over saltine crackers. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had something creamy, salty, and packed with flavor to hold you over until dinner. It might sound simple now, but back then, this little recipe kept homes running when budgets were stretched and time was short. The saltines gave it crunch, the pimento cheese added richness, and together they made a snack that showed up at school lunches, church picnics, or as a quick fix on busy afternoons. You would find this recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked in faded cookbooks, or passed down through generations of families who knew how to make the most of what they had. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of folks back then, pimento cheese on saltines was a fast, filling favorite that saved the day more than once. Railroad pie carried the grit and ingenuity of the Great Depression into the kitchens of Southern grandmothers who refused to waste a single crumb. Leftover cornbread crumbs were stirred into a simple custard of milk, eggs, and a drizzle of sorghum syrup, creating a filling that baked into a soft, rich pie. The cornbread gave the dessert a subtle texture and a gentle sweetness that set it apart from ordinary custard pies while stretching ingredients that might otherwise be discarded. Grandmothers baked these pies for men working the rails and for families needing a treat when money was scarce. The aroma of warm corn and sweet syrup filled small farmhouse kitchens, promising comfort after a long day of labor. Served warm or cold, it brought smiles to children and adults alike, proving that creativity and care could turn scraps into something memorable. Railroad pie remains a testament to resourcefulness and the quiet determination of women who kept families fed through hard times with flavor and love. Ambrosia salad was not really a salad in the way we think of salads today. It was a dessert disguised as a side dish. Grandma would fold together canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, mini marshmallows, and whipped cream, sometimes with a spoonful of sour cream to give it balance. It was creamy, sweet, and just fancy enough to make it onto the holiday table next to the turkey or ham. For many families, this was a taste of celebration. Kids loved it for the marshmallows, adults appreciated the simplicity, and everyone agreed it belonged at every potluck. Ambrosia was the kind of thing that made it into every community cookbook. Easy to make, hard to mess up, and always a crowd pleaser. You could throw it together with pantry items, let it chill for a few hours, and it would hold up just fine. Some versions added maraschino cherries or pecans for a little extra flair. These days, you might see similar flavors in retro-themed desserts, but the original ambrosia has mostly disappeared from our tables. Maybe it was too sweet, too fluffy, or just too old-fashioned. Creamed chipped carrots were never flashy, but they had their place in Grandma's dinner rotation. She would slice carrots thin, sometimes with a hand crank slicer, and simmer them until tender, then fold them into a creamy white sauce with butter and flour. The sauce was just enough to coat the carrots without drowning them, adding a gentle richness that softened their natural sweetness. You would find them beside meatloaf or roast turkey, sometimes served in little ramekins or scooped straight from a saucepan. It was a quiet dish, comforting in a way that did not ask for attention. No spices, no tricks, just care, warmth, and the steady flavor of carrots made special. They were easy to prepare, cheap to make, and always familiar. These days, carrots are raw in lunchboxes or roasted with glaze, but the creamed version is nearly forgotten. Yet there was a time when this simple dish brought real joy to the table. It deserves more than silence. Tell us which dish you'd bring back, hit like if you're craving it, and subscribe to keep the South's tastiest secrets alive.